Wait, Billy, we do have one more fun question. So,
Yes,
Tara,
we do. We have to ask everyone.
we ask everyone, if you had a walk-in song when you walked into the room, what would it be?
Hey Ya by Outkast.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. I'm Billy Mitchell.
And I'm Megan Metzger.
And this is CTRL ALT DEFENSE. All right, so let's kick off. Tara Murphy Dougherty, I said that totally terrible. Tara Murphy Dougherty is joining us, CEO of Govini. I can't talk. First
Say it
one.
10 times fast, Billy.
Tara Murphy Dougherty. Tara Murphy Dougherty is joining us, CEO of Govini. As we've been doing with these podcasts, and welcome, by the way, Tara, we want to kick things off with a little bit of a fun element. Let the listeners, the viewers, get to know you a little bit, the human behind the boss, if you will. So I'd love to kind of throw some interesting softballs at you. As we were kind of catching up, Tara, you were telling me that one of the things you like to do in your spare time over the last several years, when you can, is you're writing a cookbook. So are you a master chef, or what's the history behind that? Is that what you really wanted to be when you grow up, was a chef, or is this just what you like to do in your spare time?
No, cooking is just my love language. So only for friends and family do I cook, but I am working on a cookbook. I am going to finish it at some point. I think the reason that I'm writing it is pretty relatable at this point. So I have 2 kids. I have a husband who mostly eats low carb. I'm pescatarian, and, my kids are kids. And so I don't cook dinner every night. I cook like 3 dinners every night. And and what I've realized is a better way to do this is to make a menu. And so I'm writing a cookbook that breaks that apart and makes it achievable for working parents who are also trying to put healthy meals on the table. That has nothing to do about defense, so I already love this podcast.
Yeah. So rather than write a cookbook, I just married someone that loves to cook, because
There you go.
I can cook, it is not my love language, but eating is. So I will eat anything you make all day.
And
Good. I look forward to that.
I relate to what you're writing your cookbook about so much, because I have kids as well, and we also make kid-friendly food. Love language, or maybe my Achilles heel, though, is I eat all of my kids' leftover kid food. And that's why, since having 2 kids, I am immensely not the same, in the same shape that I was once upon a time, because I'm eating leftover chicken nuggets and corn dog nuggets and all those things. But hopefully, I would imagine you probably got a higher quality and much healthier options for your kids in that cookbook. But
well, I think it helps when you've got kind of the thing you want to start with, and then you can break off options, So I made fish tacos last night, and those fish tacos have all the toppings that an adult would want. And, my daughter had just a piece of fish and some sliced cucumbers. And while that doesn't sound like it belongs in a cookbook, it's just the ideas. I think people need the starting point. How do I eat something that, I want to eat? And if I snack on the leftovers, it's not chicken nuggets.
Gain 100. Do you have a working title? What are you going to call it?
I don't. I've gotten so many ideas from friends and folks I've talked to about this. And the ideas generally have to do with like modular meals, or, the idea of a menu. But nothing's landed yet. Branding is hard.
It's tough.
But modular meals might be a great lead into digital transformation inside the DOD. I don't know.
Exactly. I think that gets me going. Well, before we really dive in, and Tara, I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about Govini and what you do there. But I'm curious, one more fun question before we get there. Was that what you wanted to do when you grew up, or what was sort of your dream job before you became the CEO of Govini?
I wanted to be an archaeologist when I grew up. Yeah, I think mostly because I liked playing in the dirt as a kid. And then I went to college, and my favorite subjects were calculus and French. And I was like, what do you do with that? So I ended up in an international affairs program at a technical school. And professors told me, you got to get yourself to Washington, D.C., girl. And I did.
And here you are. That's really cool. Wait, Billy, we do have one more fun question.
Yes,
Tara,
we do. We have to ask everyone.
We ask everyone, if you had a walk-in song when you walked into the room, what would it be?
Hey Ya by Outkast.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Here's a fun fact. Oh gosh, and this is going to date me badly, but my very first Gmail address, because yes, we could get whatever we wanted as a Gmail handle, was Tara3000.
That's great.
So Andre, if you're listening to this, call me.
If you know. I think that's the name of this episode.
Yeah.
Tara3000.
I love that.
And I don't think that dates you at all. I mean, that puts you right in fitting company. I mean, I think that makes you young compared to a lot of people that may listen or care about this space. So
excellent.
Yeah. Well, Billy, can I kick off?
Do it.
So Tara, you and I have had an awesome opportunity just spending a lot of time together, both in really fascinating conversations with, DOD leadership and talking a lot about, hey, things need to operate differently and move differently. So I go back to when I first knew Govini and, what it was when I first met you and maybe when you first kind of came into the position. And then fast forward to today and what Govini is trying to do and really disrupt the government space. Is that a pivot? Tell us about that journey from what you were doing and how that kind of naturally led into where you guys are now.
Yeah, absolutely. So in those early days, really the starting thesis that Govini had was there was this explosion in the availability of data. And there was almost 10 years ago now, an emergence of AI and really machine learning technologies at the time to be able to get value out of that data. And what was evident is that the Department of Defense was at an early stage of this kind of transformation, but very serious about being a leading actor in using data for decision making. And so we thought, well, wait a minute, we care deeply about this mission. This is what I've devoted my career to. And we have a lot of really high quality data. We were sort of at the forefront of that movement in the technology scene, first in Silicon Valley and then coming to DC. And maybe we can make this valuable for the Defense Department itself. And let's try a go-to-market strategy that's focused on the federal government with DOD at the starting point. And I knew that I wanted to get our software into the hands specifically of people in the defense acquisition system. And when I say defense acquisition, I think big A acquisition, not procurement, but people who are managing weapon systems and platforms. Because to me, that was number one, where the numbers are. So from a business perspective, there's a great addressable market. But number two, really importantly, nobody ever builds great software for those people. And yet they've got unbelievably important, meaningful jobs. So that was the white space in the market.
Yeah. It's interesting. So we do some workforce upskilling as part of our efforts at Decode to really close that gap between the speed of tech and the way the department operates, which we're going to dive all into. Talking about big A acquisition all the way down to little A acquisition, I find there's even a big knowledge gap between how critical that function is and make or break our entire system, but really where there's opportunity to disrupt it and be creative within that system. And this idea that we have all the waivers and authorities and exceptions we need, not saying it's easy, but how much of your premise is not only does no one build great software for them, but hey, if they had something different, could they operate differently? How much do you think there's room for disruption in that space? And good disruption, not a disruptive disruption.
Not chaos disruption.
Chaos. That's the word I was looking for.
I think there's a tremendous amount. Yeah. And I think you're hitting on something really important, which is at the end of the day, the value proposition for ARC, which is our software platform for Govini in the hands of these users, isn't just that now they've got great capabilities to do their jobs. It's that they get better outcomes for the programs because they're not doing this manually. And so the biggest value driver that ARC provides to acquisition programs that now manage their efforts in this software is higher operational availability, higher readiness rates, and lower mission incapable rates. That's the change we're trying to affect. One part of the exhaust that's created, if you will, from deploying and using ARC as a software system for this kind of job set is greater efficiency and productivity. But to be totally honest, that's not what we set out to do. We set out to impact
Yeah.
availability and readiness.
Yeah. Well, Billy, I know that you all have covered, a lot of the big A acquisition and lots of movement going on. I guess, what are you seeing as far as like, where does Govini, I mean, we're not really talking about Govini, we're talking about Govini, but I think you're of a breed of company that is newer to this space. Like, do you put yourself, Tara, in that bucket of the new form of primes that are coming in to try to take over? Like, where do you position yourself, or how do you think about why you're different in this market?
I just learned this term neoprime. Have you heard this one?
I've heard it, but I think it's terrible. Can we
Yes,
stop?
I agree. I agree. So I want to be clear. I do not consider us a neoprime. I'm sure I have some learning to do in terms of what that's all about. I absolutely put us in the category of defense tech. And that to me just embodies companies that are focused on being technology firms that happen to work in defense. I do not identify as a defense contractor. That is not the Govini pronoun, and it never will be. And so that kind of technology first, market second attitude is really important to who we are, and I think it embodies a lot of these new companies. But the reason that I think the, new prime or neo prime or the next prime framework is the wrong model to talk about this is because what we actually need is not a new or different prime. What we really need is a more dynamic market to support DOD and what warfighters need.
I'm curious, as Megan described, I think it's been very interesting to watch the evolution of Govini. And I'm curious, I think a lot of what we want to talk about today is sort of that drive to more efficient outcomes that you mentioned and how that, but you described it, there's more to it than that. And I'm curious, so often when we're talking about, the impact that technology can have on the warfighter is that speed element. So one, tell me about that, obviously the impact and the importance of that. And from that big A part of the cycle all the way to, delivering effects and being able to give the warfighter what they need. But are there other elements that are equally as important? Is it, wrong to focus purely on speed? Are there other things that are important as well on that journey?
I'm sure there are, but I don't think it's wrong to focus on speed. I was just thinking about this recently. I was out in Honolulu for AUSA's Land Pack conference. And so there's a lot of talk about 2027. There's a lot of talk about the need for urgency. But it's really hard to create urgency in the absence of crisis. And for as much as we like to talk about what DOD does poorly, what it needs to be better at, one thing that the United States Department of Defense is amazing at is responding to a crisis. So, how do we create the skill set within and the incentives within the department to do two things at once, which is hard for any organization to do, as you both know. You both lead large teams and run companies. In a large bureaucracy, that motion of we need to orient DOD to a China contingency, but at the same time, day to day, what we're actively focused on and engaged in the Middle East and Europe. Those are two really hard motions to do
Yeah.
simultaneously. And I just feel like the current issue of the day sucks all the oxygen and therefore urgency out of the room. And I think that's why people talk about speed so much, Billy. But how do you see it? Like, is this what you hear from other people too?
No, it is. And I think the speed element dominates. And I think you give a good reason if you aren't moving with urgency, if you didn't have that milestone. And I hear the 2027, I'm always curious. I mean, I understand why, but, I think it's very interesting if we didn't have that 2027 sort of milestone for all or benchmark to work towards, what would be actually happening and what would be the consequence of that. If we weren't moving quick, which is frankly, everyone you talk to not quick enough, what's the cost of that inaction, that hesitation? And so, is 2027, quick enough are we moving quick enough towards that deadline? I'm curious, if we aren't moving quick enough, what's going to be the cost of that?
Well, Can I add the 2027? I understand the deadline, and it's a good marker to give us something to work for. Because, like you said, if we don't have a good crisis going on, it is hard to motivate this large of an organization to do something. But it's not like on January 1, some switch is going to
Yeah.
go off. It could happen tomorrow. With the current political and like macro political environments, I think it's unpredictable. But you said something about that I want to pick on, Tara's structures. So I was talking to a 3-star, and we were talking about how do you speed up transition rates and how do you speed up tech adoption. And he paused and in the most genuine moment goes, I haven't been trying to go slow. At some point, I need some help figuring out why we aren't fast. And it comes down to workforce and incentives and like walk me through some of that. Where did we all say speed and we all acknowledge it, but why is it so freaking hard?
I think it's incentives. I think it's lack of accountability. One of the most shocking aspects of the acquisition process is you can go completely off the rails from a cost and schedule perspective. Let's pick on Sentinel, major Nunn-McCurdy breach.
Let's do it.
And what is the resolution? We're just going to move the goalpost. We're going to rebaseline the program. And
Yeah.
I actually think there are unbelievably talented people doing their damnedest to do the right thing for U.S. national security, trying to create the next generation intercontinental ballistic missile. Nobody thinks this is easy, but where's the accountability that you can't just keep doing things the same way and we will just move the markers and the goalpost if things go wrong? So some of that is absolutely incentives related. Does the program have the right incentives in place to meet the demands? Does the program manager? But some of it is just, whose head rolls when it doesn't go right.
Yeah.
And I understand that it's hard to pinpoint one single person. I'm not saying that I have a name that, that person belongs in front of Congress and on the chopping block. I'm just saying that structurally, there is that lack of accountability. And that means that when people don't move quickly and they don't meet timelines and they don't meet deadlines, whether you're talking about inside the government or you're talking about the government managing its primes, then that's where you get bloat in the timeline and that's where you lose speed.
Like you're queen for a day. And you don't meet your goals, what is the accountability lever? Like, what's the consequence? What do you think
You
it should be?
cancel the program. You cancel the program or you put it, if you're going to re-baseline, then there are a different set of expectations about what you as a program office are capable of managing and achieving. And certainly part of that should be how the program is run overall. I will give you one specific example as it relates to Sentinel. We know that they rely significantly on consultants within that program office. And that hasn't necessarily created bad outcomes, but why is that persisting when the program's off the rails and there are technology solutions?
Yeah.
What's the industrial base way ahead for this missile? How are you doing things differently to shore up the suppliers than you did 2 years ago? And I haven't heard the answers to that, and I don't think anyone's demanding answers to that.
I'd be curious. I totally agree. And I think it's all very interesting. What about the opposite, though? Like giving people opportunities to fail forward and sort of take some risk and try new things? Because that's one thing we hear a lot about is that people feel risk averse and don't want to try, which I think would give them the opportunity to maybe speed or find some efficiencies. So how do you find that balance? Because you want that to happen at the same time, right?
Definitely. I'm going to channel my inner Megan Metzger right now and say this is actually a workforce issue. Because I think that the reason we don't see more risk taking in the acquisition system is primarily because people don't know how to take smart risks. There's a program that we're on, and the contracting officer was writing a new type of contract. And he said, also, shamelessly, and there is no shame here, but it was just sort of matter of fact, didn't realize the reaction that we would have on the other side of the table, said, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never written a firm fixed price contract.
What?
Exactly. And
Wow.
what that actually highlights is that people learn a way of doing things and then they just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And so we want these same contracting officers to take all sorts of risk and try new methods and break outside the FAR. But has anybody sat down and taught them how to do that and how to do it well? And by the way, can they do it quickly? Because that's what they're always asked to do. So that kind of comes back to training.
I think it also has to do with what is the risk calculus we're actually taking, because I don't envy the position of those contracting staff either, who in their mind are gonna try something new. They'll probably get it a little wrong the first time. Do they have the top cover to like rethink how they're evaluating risk? I met a contracting officer once and was just deathly afraid of protests. Or in a forum where we were talking about pulling in commercial tech, using it to go fast, how to do modular contracting. And they said, I won't give contracts to emerging tech companies because they might go out of business and I also will get protested. And bless the gentleman on the panel with me who was, had some seen combat and said, with all due respect, ma'am, you're just shifting the risk to the people with the most to lose, me out in the field, who now you didn't get the capability you need to because you were a little scared that you might get dinged on your performance report. And I had this moment of, is that their fault though? I would say probably not. They don't have leadership that will jump on that grenade and tell them it's okay, or that's given them the space to actually explore how they could do it differently. They're just going back to what they know because they're a day late and a dollar short on getting their stack of procurements out the door. I don't know. I
This
think a
is
lot of
where
us,
incentives come into play. Imagine that performance report wasn't great if you kept everything on the rails, bad if you got a protest, but instead was how many different types of contracting actions did you put in place this year? What's the diversity of contract types you used? What's the portfolio of pricing types that you have in your repertoire and are actively using? That's what we should be incentivizing this workforce to strive for and to develop the skills to do.
So we're talking about tech and tech transition. I think the other gap here, though, is how do you also expect contracting officers to know enough about tech to structure these things differently? So we see a lot of the business models of commercial tech companies and the way that we're letting contracts just go boom. And I'll give you an example. You mentioned, okay, great news. This organization is putting out an OTA, but they still wanted a 10-page cost buildup for a firm fixed price
Right.
contract and like pages and pages requirements and their fringe benefits. And they're like, we're commercial software. We sell a product. I don't know what fringe, like, what do you want me to make up some numbers? And they no bid it. And it was wired for them. Isn't that insane? But
Yes. And yet
but how do
it happens all the time.
it happens all the time. How do we close that gap though? 'Cause we say training, but we can't just pull people out and do training. What do you do?
I mean, you can pull people out and do training. It's about what's important to you. And, I think you said something really important there, which was business models. So the contracting officers don't need to know the tech. They don't. The contracting officers need to understand the business models because they're supposed to be the business advisor to that mission owner who has the requirement. And what we've seen, I think, is a big breakdown in trust between the mission owners and the contracting officers, where the mission owners want to say, this is exactly what I want to do. Just go make it happen. Thanks for your interest in national security if you weigh in on the acquisition strategy here. And sometimes contracting officers aren't proffering any actual advice and counsel with respect to that acquisition approach because they're not up to date on various business models or what the option space is. They're just doing the thing that they've always done.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that we're having this conversation because this is what's definitely something I wanted to raise as part of a larger conversation, like who ultimately is responsible for fixing this, changing this. And I think we've touched on two elements: senior leadership kind of providing that top cover and having the, want or the will to do something different, the contracting officers sort of knowing how to do it differently. I think there's also the commercial tech element as we try to recruit more commercial tech into this space and having them understand how to navigate this. And we've had a lot of conversations about this recently. So how do you do that? I mean, I know you're both sort of in the business of that. So hopefully Megan particularly, but Tara, you too, I think, do we kind of place more responsibility as we recruit more commercial tech into the defense space for them to understand how to navigate this? Or is it the responsibility of the DOD to make it easier for them to navigate? How do you kind of balance that out? Because I always see that balance. There's multiple players in this.
Sarah, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I actually think it is the company's responsibilities. I do not think it is the responsibility of the Department of Defense to make it easy, hard, or anything otherwise for companies to figure out how to work with them. I think it is the job of the Department of Defense to deter war and win it when they have to fight it, and to go out and solicit the participation of a range of companies that enable that mission. That's where they get in their own way. And I do believe that, Bill, you asked the question, whose responsibility when it comes to what DOD has control over and is responsible for, who is accountable at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the Secretary of Defense is accountable for this. But one thing I talk about a lot internally at Govini and is core to our DNA here is I will remind people, for all the frustrations of working with government, just stop for a minute and remember that there's no keg in their kitchen. They don't wear jeans to work. Nobody gave them an equity plan when they signed up. People do this, really good people do these hard jobs day in and day out for the mission. And you have to approach all of this with a real, genuine respect for public service and for an alignment on mission orientation, and then do the work, because it is hard to sell into DOD. And if you just want to make money or you just want to sell a product, go find an easier market. But if you want to be aligned on that mission, do the work, figure out how to get it done, and then Decode is going to help DOD figure out how to work with you.
Yeah, we'll save it all. That's so. I mean, I hate to probably say what the answer you expected, which is both sides, because I do think that there's plenty that the department can do to understand the business models, where we unintentionally put up blockers without realizing it. So you want to talk about, if we're going to go down into contracting, we can pick on contracting, but it's my favorite subject out of my love for it. But like IP rights and clauses that require security clearances out of the gate worldwide, CONUS, like that just block companies from out of the gate. Or we talk about finances, that's one side. I think there's plenty of places to lower those barriers, but a lot of the reason those things exist is because bureaucracies were designed to actually be methodical, do right by the taxpayer. It's working, it's doing what it's designed to do. So they can't let all of that go. I do think that companies have a responsibility to understand it, to come with that kind of empathy, if you will, of understanding what the system is intended to do, but also say something and have dialogue where you can, because I've seen a lot of companies turn away from the market and say, forget it, I'm out, but never actually explain to the contracting staff or the program staff or anything like, hey, if we actually are in this together, like let's kind of find a middle ground here. And I think that's one of the myths, is that you can't have conversations like that, and you actually can't. Now, you'll find plenty of people inside the government legal that say, no, you can't talk to companies. That's also myth. It's like understanding what you can and cannot do is maybe one of the biggest secret weapons for a company, because then you can use that to actually drive some meaningful conversations. But just don't walk away, right? Easy to say when you have lots of money or like you're profitable, right? Different when you need to go to a different industry that moves a little faster, but I don't know.
I heard kegs in kitchens, and that's all I could think of since then. I think that's the solution.
She's going, why didn't we do this at their office?
Yeah.
No kegs in your kitchen.
My God.
I don't know. I've been at your kitchen, Billy. You got that fancy Nespresso machine up there.
I know. I'm all hyped up on coffee when I could be drinking beer, though. Come on.
Just evens you out.
No, but I think a natural follow-up, and, we've had this conversation with some other folks, and so I'd be interested to hear your thought, Tara, because we've seen more, again, we all know the push towards commercial, and that there seems to be this moment happening where there's a drive, especially in the Pentagon, for It's towards more of that VC funded Silicon Valley type company. And it seems like whether it's a response or it was preempted in itself, a lot of those types of companies also trying to funnel their work towards the Department of Defense as well. So it seems like they're, even if it's not companies like Megan's who are out there informing, commercial innovative companies how to attract work with the DOD or go towards them, there is this natural flow from Silicon Valley to the DOD and vice versa. And so I guess my question to you does that feel legitimate? Is it hype, or is that something that's going to be a natural fit, or are those companies, I saw Andreessen Horowitz wrote a blog post about how its companies can work with the Department of Defense. So are those things, why is that happening? And is that something you think is going to work out, or I don't know, is it just something where they're chasing the money?
I don't think it's hype. I think it's real. What's really interesting about this moment is, if you go back in time 10 years ago, DIUX was established because that movement that you just described, Billy, wasn't happening. And we didn't have Silicon Valley interested in working with defense at all. You had one pathfinding company in Palantir who said, we're on a FOTWA to figure it out. And they did. And a number of these forces started to change that dynamic. And what has really shifted over the past couple of years is now investors are interested in this space. So you have the momentum of companies that are more mission-oriented, they're interested in DOD, they want to be a part of what is happening for the government and for U.S. national security, but they have their capital backers who are supportive of this too, which is a huge, huge change very recently. What hasn't changed is how much DOD funding those companies are winning. And what is really interesting about this moment in time is you kind of can't blame the system anymore, because now we have executive orders. Now we have investors in positions of power in government. Now we have SecDef memos saying buy commercial, do the right thing, follow the law. So those contracts should start coming, right? And the money should flow. And we know from Govini's data that only about 1% of the funding that DOD spends on contracts, dollars out the door on contracts, goes to VC-backed companies. Is that number going to go up? And if it doesn't, are there any conditions under which this dynamic can change? Because it seems like these are the conditions now.
Yeah, I think it will come down to execution. There were a number of those EOs that came out where I'd say I have friends like, hey, did Decode write this? Be more innovative, commercial tech, all of the right words. And then, like we've already said 10 times, it's going to come down to where the rubber meets the road and how people pick it up and go execute on it. Do you do some fake market research via Google and say, check, I looked to see if there was some commercial tech and didn't find it? I think if we don't pair it with different contract incentives and think really got to force the hand of some of these primes to, again, not just be on time, on schedule, on budget, but actually get a real mission outcome, I think that's when it's going to, with those two things combined, it could be super powerful. But let's pick at that a little bit. So there's some efforts going on across the department. Over the past several years, you're focused on data-centric warfare, data-centric decision-making speed, all of these things. And then you have some more progressive programs, I'd call them, but you see some traditional players in them, splashes of innovation. You wrote a spicy little op-ed that I was a fan of called Make Advana Great Again, that got some attention and responses from some of these traditional players. But give us that rundown. What inspired you to write that?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks to Defense Scoop for publishing it.
Of course,
I think they're doing some of...
Thank you for offering it to us.
Look at this love for us, guys.
My new best friend already.
I do think they're doing some of the most exciting writing on what's happening in the data space for defense, and especially all the change that's happening around CDAO these days. But this is such an exciting inflection point for Advana. And Advana, for all of, I'm sure, your viewers and listeners who follow this stuff closely, is the preeminent data management platform for the entire Department of Defense. So if you're going to get something right, let's get Advana right. And what I was hoping to do with that op-ed was make the case on a couple of points while the department is in this decision-making stage of what does the next phase of Advana's life cycle look like? And frankly, how do we get it on a better position or better footing? And the thing that Advana has been really successful at is around that data management aspect. Previous to Advana, all we talked about was data hoarding and lack of data access and lack of data sharing and lack of data use in decision making in DOD. And that has dramatically changed. And a lot of that is thanks to the progress that Advana made in modernizing and centralizing these data pipelines. Centralizing the data is a great idea. Centralizing what sits on top of the data is a really bad idea. And I would like DOD, especially given the backdrop that we were just talking about with all the EOs and the, SecDef memo and all of the movement in a really good way on defense acquisition, to perhaps put a software company at the helm of its marquee software program for data management in DOD. And I think that will help get to a better outcome in terms of solving user problems with the software that sits on top of this incredibly powerful data platform.
Okay, so tell me why. What's different about putting a software provider on top of a software platform than the alternative?
So the alternative is you essentially have a focus on the data itself instead of a focus on solving user problems. When you focus on the data itself, what is useful for that is, well, let's visualize this data because now we've got it all in one place. And to some extent, data visualization can be very powerful. Sometimes you just want to know what the data tells you. That's great if you are the Deputy Secretary of Defense and you need to know in a snapshot what is happening across my enterprise. It's terrible if you are an item manager who's trying to replace a part because the procurement lead time on your critical part that right now is keeping an aircraft in depot for 180 days longer than it's supposed to be is unavailable on the market. Those are the kinds of problems that DOD is grappling with, and Advana should be helping to solve them, but it's not because it's a bunch of dashboards on top of this incredibly powerful data. And what software companies do really well is they start with what's the problem I'm solving for? Not what are the requirements you have, user, because users are terrible at telling you what they need. But great product managers will give you what you didn't even know to ask for because they start with what's the problem to be solved. And that's the kind of capability that should be built on top of this unbelievable starting point that is the data management platform of Advana. That's what the next phase of this program should be, especially if it's going to be a formal program of record and probably an ACAT 1 major defense acquisition program.
Do you think, and I think readers of our publication and others will know this, but Advana's going through a recompete. There's some changes coming. Do you think, or do you know, or is it too soon to know that things are headed in a more positive direction?
I don't know definitively. And I think we're all eager to see what will come out of the department in terms of how they're thinking about the program. One of the first signals right off the bat is what will be released for this recompete. Will it be a big traditional RFP? Will it be a CSO? These are going to be indicators about how seriously the drive to do things differently is being funneled into the next stage of this program in particular.
And I think, going back to Megan's adage, you're queen for a day. I would assume moving in a direction of something more agile with CSOs and things like that will be better. So you can on and off ramp companies if you need to. But what does an optimal solution look like to you in that, when that solicitation drops?
I think an optimal solution is commercial first. I think, one of the things that Booz Allen did really well at the helm of the first phase of Advana was wrangle the unbelievable number of companies that DOD wanted involved in this program. And frankly, I think this is mostly a DOD problem. This isn't a prime problem. This is I am going to ask you to do more and more and more and more. Probably not going to keep giving you more and more and more budget. I'm going to put company after company into the ecosystem to solve this next thing or to build this next dashboard or bring in this cool widget. And Booz, you just have to figure out how to pull it all together. They are an amazing company. That is a terrible way to use them. Let them vet some of the tech. Let them come up with plans. Let them focus on integration of commercial capabilities where that integration is required and the company doesn't want to do it themselves. I think that's the really important difference. When you tell them kludge together a whole bunch of cats and dogs of commercial tech that doesn't normally coexist, it puts them in a position of that's a very hard job to do. And frankly, it isn't the right approach for the program from a technical architecture perspective, which was part of my op-ed.
Well, you kind of hit on relationships between someone like a Booz or a systems integrator in these commercial tech companies. I'm curious your response for, I know a number of them, not all have the same narrative, but a number of them that would say commercial tech first might be a bad idea because they don't have the operational context. And operational context is king when you're working with a department. But I don't think those two things have to be, one or the other. So what do you think that relationship should look like? How should these primes that need to reinvent themselves in this new market think about commercial first? It's going to change their business model, right?
I think that the primes should be thinking about commercial first as DOD's interest in buying better and buying a different way. And if I were at the helm of a traditional defense prime right now, I would be spending all of my time thinking about how do I disrupt my own business from a business model perspective to continue to grow in this space. I would have the innovator's dilemma on my nightstand and I would read it over and over and over because this is what's happening to them right now. And I don't think that there needs to, I'm with you, Megan. I don't think there needs to be a trade-off, or frankly, I think it's a false trade-off between commercial or operational context because the user gives the operational context. The customer is the operational context. And where you get a company, I'll give you a specific example. There's a program office that we work with who, when we came in, they're like, we've got this under control. We do not need defense acquisition software. We've got 60 suppliers. This is an ACAT 1 MDEP. We have 60 suppliers that we track in a spreadsheet, and we use Jira for our risk register. And we said, first of all, ARC, put your program name in. You have 160,000 suppliers, so you might just need to expand your spreadsheet. And secondly, I love Atlassian to pieces, but they did not build this to support, frankly, like missile programs.
Right.
So
missile programs on spreadsheets is a
there are places where
democracy.
companies just aren't going to deploy the people alongside with their tech to do that kind of close the gap between the tech and the operational context. And there is a role for companies who specialize that and understand the technology and also the warfighter. But there are a lot of great software companies that are dying to get their people in to do that implementation and frankly have a good understanding of the operational context. So yeah, I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, I had an opportunity. I was out in the CENTCOM AOR and got to go into some of the ops centers, and it was shocking the amount of really critical missions that were being planned in PowerPoint, OneNote, and Excel spreadsheets. And I know that's been a little bit of your kind of core mission. I love your background. You've got a lot of global affairs, and I know recently you've been really focused in on this supply chain challenge. Like, can we do supply chain on spreadsheets? And if we don't, Billy asked us, like, what is the biggest risk? Like, what happens if we keep tracking stuff like supply chain on spreadsheets? What happens to America?
We lose. We lose because we never stop reacting to problems that have already happened. So what happens instead when you use an AI-driven platform and you proactively manage your suppliers is you don't look for alternatives or read about risk that already exists. You get indicators that something bad is going to happen. And whether it happens or not is sort of immaterial. What matters is you have indications that there's something to investigate and take action on. And depending on where that risk threshold is, you might say, I'm not replacing this supplier, I'll take that risk. Or you might say, oh my God, we cannot let them shut down this production line, and I can't afford to go through a 3-year, reverse engineering process after it happens. Maybe we can do an end of lifetime buy now.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not just Excel either. So, in
Yeah.
addition to supply chain, we've been doing quite a bit with the logistics community across DOD. It's a natural evolution for all the work we do sustaining programs and platforms at home. How to use AI in order to optimize deploying them into theater and then sustaining them there. And oh my gosh, when you ask a logie what they use if they don't have ARC, it's not a spreadsheet, it's not OneNote, it's cardboard in the back of the truck.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember years ago we were working on kind of in an Air Force kind of maintenance context, and we had some folks that were like, when I get off the aircraft, I write it on a log on my clipboard. I walk a mile to a computer, I type it in, I print it out, I take it to another place where I scan it with OCR. I'm like, this is how we were doing maintenance. I don't remember the exact problems, but I might have even embellished. I don't think by much. And you're like, how are you going to prevent these aircraft from staying up and functional in a way that doesn't accidentally injure somebody if he or she makes one error on their sheet or if it gets typed in wrong? Like, insanity. I also think we have found the bounds and the extremes of SharePoint and what you can do with it. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Billy, should we do a rapid fire round?
Yeah, I think it's a fun way to end it. Do you want to do the first one or should I jump in?
Go for it.
All right. I think this was a fun one. I think we've hit on this a little bit, but it's I guess a theme for the episode. But you're given the keys to the kingdom. You're the sec def for a day. What's your first executive order, Tara?
My first is probably a path forward on Advana. My second is, I'm cheating. I'm going to have two. My second is I would mandate that all FFRDCs have to publicly release their contracts data, just like companies do.
Ooh,
Nice.
we do a whole nother episode on this one. I like this topic. It's a good one. Okay, I've got one. If you could have any job inside the government besides one you've already had, what would it be?
Oh, I didn't see that one coming. I mean, probably Deputy Secretary of Defense, right?
All right, get some stuff done.
Yeah.
Yeah, run all the things.
We all know that's who really holds all the power. I ask this one a lot, I feel like, and maybe it's a very cliche question, but who's really winning the race to AI? Us, China, someone else?
I think we're in a standoff. I would have said up until very recently that for all our chest thumping and fear mongering to create urgency, the United States is still ahead. And then DeepSeek happened. I think we are standing on the wall facing each other Cold War style, and somebody's about to fall off.
Interesting.
Well, let's hope it's not us. Okay, I think we did it.
Yeah.
What did we not ask you, Tara? Anything we didn't ask you? Dying to say?
No, this was so much fun. I'm so grateful that you had me on.
Yeah, this was great.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We appreciate the time. For those who haven't read it, go read her op-ed on Defense Scoop, since we talked a lot about it. But Tara, it's been great chatting with you. And like Megan said, hopefully we can do a part 2 and we can really dig into those FFRDCs.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Thanks.